It was a quiet December night. The children were asleep, and the house was peaceful. However, something terrible was happening behind a closed door. By the next day, Lynsey Quy had disappeared. There were no phone calls, no notes, just silence and a strange account from the man who lived with her. Initially, no one knew what to make of it, but as time went on, the truth began to emerge. What really occurred that night in Southport? Lynsey Wilson was born in the seaside town of Southport, near Liverpool. As one of 6 children in a loving and supportive family, Lynsey flourished in the caring environment provided by her parents. She had a strong bond with her siblings, especially her brother, Peter Wilson, who was just a year older. They shared laughter, secrets, and close friendships. Lynsey had a magnetic personality that attracted others, radiating energy, compassion, and joy. Her life changed dramatically in 1995. Lynsey had first become involved with Mitchell Quy when she was 17 and pregnant by another man. Her brother introduced them. He worked with Mitchell at a local casino. What started as a promising relationship quickly escalated into a passionate romance. Within a week, they were engaged, and just weeks later, they were married. However, the celebration was muted. Mitchell's family was largely absent from the wedding, with only his brother, Elliot Quy, present. On that same day, Lynsey's father witnessed their first argument, a troubling sign of the difficulties that lay ahead, although no one could have anticipated just how severe their challenges would become. Mitchell grew up in Essex, but relocated to Southport as a teenager after the tragic loss of his mother, with a father frequently absent for work and a younger brother to look after. Mitchell had to mature quickly and face life on his own. This hardship transformed into a more troubling side of his character. In the early stages of his marriage, Mitchell's initial charm disappeared, revealing a harsh and unyielding personality. He became possessive and unpredictable, insisting that everything go his way. Lynsey, who had hoped for a stable life, now felt completely trapped. 6 weeks after the wedding, Lynsey's daughter, Robin, was born. Mitchell began to disappear for days at a time, leaving Lynsey and Robin while he pursued affairs and wild nights. When he returned, he brought roses and offered apologies. This created a cycle of abuse that only grew tighter. Desperate to hold on to the man she once loved, Lynsey repeatedly forgave him. However, each forgiveness made her feel more diminished. Mitchell's control over her became more deceptive. He started to distance her from everyone important in her life, friends, siblings, and even her father, who had always been her protector. Gradually, he made himself the sole influence in her life. Lynsey found herself increasingly isolated, with every escape route blocked by the man who claimed to love her. 18 months after they married, Lynsey sought to escape her situation and turned to a local support center for single mothers, where she found a place to live. For a short time, she felt some relief. However, Mitchell tracked her down, filled with apologies, promises, and tears, which led them back into the same toxic cycle. Lynsey returned home, and soon after, she became pregnant again, hoping this new start might bring change. She approached her pregnancy with quiet determination. She might have believed that the baby could transform Mitchell. Victims of abuse often suffer from misplaced guilt, feeling as though they triggered the pain they endure. Unfortunately, nothing improved. Lynsey's mum reveals she stopped visiting her daughter because she didn't want to see Mitchell, and that the last time she saw her was on December 13th. On Christmas Eve, Mitchell visited Mrs. Wilson to collect the children's presents and told her that Lynsey was getting ready to go out. While the family felt uncomfortable, they weren't overly worried, as her absence had started to feel normal. However, as the holidays went by, without any news from Lynsey, their concern grew stronger. It was 6 weeks before a social worker reported her missing. Due to Lynsey's history of domestic abuse, the police responded quickly. Mitchell claimed that Lynsey had left just before Christmas, when she packed her bags and walked away, never to return. He insisted that she was an adult capable of making her own choices. However, both Lynsey's family and investigators found his account suspicious and doubted his statements. By April the following year, police discovered Mitchell had been withdrawing benefits in Lynsey's name. They arrested him on suspicion of murder, solicitation to cause grievous bodily harm, and fraud. Although he downplayed the seriousness of his actions, his comments unsettled those who heard them. He stated he wouldn't even help her if she were in danger after what she did to him and the kids. As time went on, suspicions about Mitchell intensified. He appeared completely untroubled and showed no signs of sadness. He gave interviews, portraying himself as a victim who had been deserted. However, investigators weren't fooled by his performance. They suspected that Lynsey never left the house alive, but they lacked evidence, no body, no confession, and no clear proof. The central question was, where was Lynsey Quy? While Lynsey's family desperately searched for her, Mitchell seemed to enjoy being in the spotlight. With cameras rolling and reporters watching, he presented himself not as a grieving partner, but as someone who thrived on the attention. Mitchell even sent the detective a Christmas card with a bottle of hair dye and a note telling him to get rid of the gray hair to feel more confident. He reported to the authorities that he had seen Lynsey around town, specifically near shops, and in a black Mercedes with another man. He insisted she was nearby and that he could recognize her, yet no one else ever spotted her. He depicted himself as a victim of suspicion rather than tragedy. His statements were inconsistent and lacked any evidence to support them. Despite thorough forensic investigations, no conclusive evidence was found in the home he had shared with Lynsey. Investigators did discover significant purchases of cleaning supplies, which raised concerns, but without a body or evidence of wrongdoing. The case has reached a standstill. While Mitchell misled the media and law enforcement, Lynsey's family faced overwhelming silence. Her father, Peter, spearheaded a persistent search for her. He distributed flyers throughout neighborhoods to seek help and to confront Mitchell with Lynsey's image daily. He scoured canals, ditches, and muddy woods, holding on to hope but increasingly feeling despair. Peter suspected Mitchell was involved, but without a body, a confession, or any closure, he was left with grief and unanswered questions. Each week, Peter confronted a terrifying reality as he picked up his grandchildren from the man he believed killed his daughter. He maintained a calm voice and neutral expression, but beneath his composed facade was an anger he struggled to contain for Lynsey, for her children, and for the elusive truth. A pivotal moment occurred on June 9th, several months after Lynsey went missing, when police officially declared her dead. On the same day, they arrested Mitchell for her murder. During police questioning, he declined to provide any information, repeating the phrase "no comment." The evidence against him was weak, just bits of circumstantial evidence and a pattern of troubling behavior. Then, unexpectedly, after only one night in custody, Mitchell confessed. He revealed that he had killed Lynsey on December 16, 1998. That evening, they argued in their bedroom, just steps away from where their two young children were sleeping. Lynsey allegedly said she wanted a divorce. Mitchell grabbed her by the neck and held her to the floor for 20 minutes. He then placed her body in the bedroom and sealed the door with a towel to prevent her two children from smelling the corpse. In the following 48 hours, Mitchell committed a horrifying act. In the attic of their family home, he dismembered Lynsey's body. He didn't do this alone. His brother Elliot, who had previously worked in a butcher shop, assisted him. Police believe Elliot's experience helped minimize evidence and avoid mistakes. Lynsey Quy was not known for being independent. Investigators described him as having limited cognitive abilities and likely needing special care. His life centered around his older brother, Mitchell, who had a significant influence on him. Unfortunately, this influence led Elliot into a dark situation. After confessing to a murder, Mitchell guided investigators to where he had hidden the remains of Lynsey. The discoveries were disturbing. Miss Quy dismembered body was found in a shallow grave near a roller coaster at Pleasureland in the seaside resort of Southport, Merseyside. Her arms and legs were later found wrapped in plastic bags in separate places on a railway embankment. A bin bag containing her head and hands, believed to have been buried in 200,000 tons of rubbish at a Lancashire landfill site has never been recovered. One disturbing detail emerged during the investigation. Mitchell likely disposed of Lynsey's remains while out walking with his children. This cold and calculated approach, using casual outings as a disguise, was both unsettling and clever, as he knew how to avoid suspicion. In January 2001, the case went to trial at Liverpool Crown Court. However, before the trial began, Mitchell attempted to change his confession. He claimed he hadn't killed Lynsey, but had only dismembered and discarded her body. His story was so far-fetched that even his own legal team urged him to drop it. Ultimately, Mitchell pleaded guilty to all charges. The court found him guilty not only of murder, but also of obstructing justice and misleading law enforcement. He was sentenced to life in prison, with the possibility of parole after 17 years. Meanwhile, Elliot received a 7-year sentence, which many members of Lynsey's family felt was too lenient. The outcome brought some relief, but it did not bring peace. Sadly, just 3 months after the sentencing, the family faced another heartbreaking tragedy. Lynsey's brother, Peter Wilson Jr., was found dead in the attic of their childhood home. He had taken his own life, leaving no note, but those who knew him understood the reason. Peter had never forgiven himself for introducing Lynsey to Mitchell. In the months following her death, he fell into a deep depression, isolating himself and overwhelmed by guilt. He often expressed that his life felt meaningless without his sister. Tragically, it was his father, who had already been burdened by Lynsey's loss, who discovered Peter's body. At that time, Peter's fiancée was pregnant, meaning another child would grow up without knowing their father, yet another victim of the devastation caused by Mitchell's actions. In 2017, Mitchell became eligible for parole. Lynsey's daughter, Robin, who was only 22 at the time, started a campaign to stop his release. She created a petition on Facebook that gathered thousands of signatures and became a powerful call for justice. The public's anger contributed to the rejection of Mitchell's parole requests. By 2022, he had been denied parole 3 times. His ongoing manipulative behavior in prison, such as aggressive outbursts and involvement in illegal substances smuggling, reinforced the arguments against his release. Lynsey's children, Robin and Jack, were brought up by Wilson family in a loving and stable environment, which was the kind of upbringing their mother always wished for them. Their story today serves as a powerful reminder that there are often people behind closed doors who are quietly asking for help. Lynsey Quy,'s 1998 murder by Mitchell Quy tore through her family and Southport's quiet streets. Her cheerful spirit, the light to her children, Robin and Jack, was lost in a barbaric act. The pain deepened when her brother, Peter Wilson Jr., took his own life. Despite this, the Wilson family found strength. Robin's courageous fight kept Mitchell in prison, honoring her mother's love. Southport's community rallied, sharing flyers and holding vigils to keep Lynsey's name alive and warn against domestic abuse. Meanwhile, her unrecovered remains leave an ache, but Robin and Jack thrive in the caring home Lynsey always wanted. Her story begs us to notice those trapped in silence, to offer help, and to hold loved ones close before it's too late. A mother of 2 disappeared mysteriously, she sending alarming messages to her family before she vanished. Police began investigating immediately, trying to understand conflicting information. However, the investigation took an unexpected turn, revealing a shocking story that would captivate the nation. Katie Kenyon was born in Burnley, a small town in Britain. She had 2 very close sisters. Even as a child, Katie was known for her kindness and generosity, always willing to help others. Later, she married and had 2 children, a son and a daughter. Sadly, her husband left, and although he occasionally visited the children, Katie raised them on her own. It was difficult, as her job as a social care worker didn't pay much, but Katie always made sure her children had everything they needed. On April 22, 2022, 33-year-old Katie followed her normal morning routine, preparing her children for school and sending them off. Later that day, around noon, Katie's mother received a strange text message from her. Katie stated she needed to get away for a while to clear her head. Her mother immediately tried calling her, but the call went directly to voicemail. The idea that she would abandon everything, especially her children, seemed completely out of character. Katie's mother contacted Katie's sister, Sarah Kenyon Holden. They rushed over to her house and noticed that her car was gone. Using a spare key, they let themselves inside and found all of Katie's belongings right where she'd left them, except for her phone and handbag. It just didn't add up. The idea that Katie had taken off somewhere, leaving behind almost everything she owned, felt completely wrong. Something was off. Soon after, Katie's children arrived home from school and shared something concerning. They had both received odd text messages, supposedly from their mother. In the texts, Katie stated she needed help to become a better mother and instructed them to contact their father to care for them during her absence. Upon reading these messages, Sarah immediately suspected they weren't written by her. Firstly, the tone was unlike Katie's usual way of speaking. More significantly, the word "while" was misspelled in both texts, which was highly unusual for Katie, as she never made such errors. Katie had mentioned Andrew Burfield, Katie's ex-boyfriend of several years, in messages to her children, saying he would care for them if their father couldn't. Sarah contacted Andrew. He told her he hadn't seen Katie since the previous day because he'd been at work. He stated that Katie texted him around 2 p.m. that day, informing him that she was leaving her car, keys, and bank card in his mailbox. Andrew claimed this was to repay the £6,000 she owed him for past anxiety treatment. However, Sarah completely disbelieved Andrew's account. Katie's son then mentioned that Andrew had contacted him on social media. Andrew's message stated that Katie had checked into a clinic and asked him to care for her dog until she returned. This struck Katie's mother and Sarah as odd. While they knew Katie and Andrew had a long, turbulent relationship, they believed it was over. Therefore, it seemed strange that Katie would inform Andrew of her plans while neglecting to tell her own mother or children. So, Sarah and her boyfriend decided to drive over to Andrew's place and investigate. The moment they pulled up, she spotted Katie's car parked outside. Inside, she could see Katie's purse and other personal belongings, which only heightened her suspicion. She knocked on Andrew's door, hoping to talk to him face to face, but he refused to open it and told them to leave. The whole thing felt incredibly off. Sarah didn't understand why Andrew seemed so uncooperative. Her boyfriend ended up threatening to kick the door down if he didn't let them in, but Andrew just called the police instead. A few minutes later, officers arrived and spoke with Katie's sister first. She laid everything out, how the family was worried sick, and how they didn't believe for a second that Katie would just vanish without saying a word to anyone. She also pointed out her sister's car still parked there with her stuff inside. After that, the police knocked on Andrew's door. He gave them the same story he told over the phone, that he'd been at work when Katie texted him about leaving her car, keys, and bank card, and said she was going to check herself into a clinic. He even let them search his house and his van, and they didn't find anything suspicious. So, the police left, but they did open a missing persons case. Just to cover all bases, they called around to a bunch of clinics, hoping maybe Katie really had checked herself in somewhere, but not a single one had seen her. The next morning, police began piecing together a timeline of Katie's disappearance. And naturally, all eyes were on Andrew's house, since that's where her car had been found. Detectives learned there was a surveillance camera nearby, so they pulled the footage from the previous couple of days. On April 21st, the day before Katie went missing, she was seen pulling up to Andrew's house. The footage showed her getting into his van, kissing him and smiling. Nothing seemed out of the ordinary. But the next morning, at 9:20 a.m., things took a very different turn. That was the day Andrew told police he'd been at work when Katie supposedly dropped off her car, but the footage showed otherwise. It clearly showed Katie arriving at his house, getting out of her car and climbing into the passenger seat of Andrew's van. And right there behind the wheel was Andrew himself. Police immediately checked traffic cameras along the direction the van had gone. This time, the van stopped at a McDonald's, then headed out toward the highway. The final footage showed Andrew turning onto a rural back road leading into a wooded area. After that, the van disappeared from view for nearly an hour, but then it popped up again. This time, though, there was only one person in the vehicle. So, now, a much darker picture was starting to form. Based on the footage, it looked like Andrew had driven Katie out to a wooded area and then left without her. The police pulled location data from Katie's phone on the day she went missing. The record showed that her phone disconnected from the tower near her house early that morning, then reconnected near Andrew's home. From there, the phone's path followed the exact route the van had taken. According to the location data, Katie's phone was still in the van as it headed back towards Andrew's place. The problem was Katie was no longer in the van. And then came the final piece. Investigators checked the time those strange messages were sent to Katie's mom and kids. And by that point, Andrew had already returned home alone. But location data clearly showed that those texts were sent from his house. Given that all the evidence directly contradicted Andrew's version of events, police decided to head back to his house. The moment they stepped inside, something felt off. The place was boiling hot. Turns out Andrew had fired up the wood, burning stove, despite the weather being pretty mild outside. Right away, detectives suspected he might have been trying to destroy some evidence, but by the time they got there, all that was left in the stove was ash. Even so, they arrested Andrew and brought him in for questioning. Surprisingly, he didn't seem nervous at all. In fact, he looked completely relaxed and stuck to his original story, claiming Katie had probably checked herself into a clinic to deal with her anxiety. When detectives started pressing for more answers, he shut down completely and said he wouldn't talk without a lawyer. So, once again, they were left with nothing. After the interrogation, police decided to launch a large-scale search operation in the forest, where Katie's phone had last pinged right before Andrew was seen driving back alone. Covering that area, however, wasn't an easy task. They were looking at roughly 25 miles of rugged terrain. Still, they pulled in dozens of officers, requested backup from other agencies, and headed out into the woods. Soon they had helicopters with thermal imaging, drones, specialized equipment, and even a team of divers. Volunteers joined in too. The search quickly became one of the biggest operations their town had ever seen. But even with all that manpower, it still wasn't enough to cover such a huge area. Then, out of nowhere, police got a tip. Someone had seen Andrew's van parked in a specific part of the forest. That changed everything. Now that they had a likely spot, they were able to narrow the search down to a 5-mile radius. As the search teams combed through the forest, detectives brought Andrew in for another round of questioning. This time, they laid out the surveillance footage and other evidence they had gathered. Faced with the facts, Andrew changed his story. He admitted that he and Katie had driven out to the woods, but what he said next left investigators baffled. According to Andrew, the two of them went there to have a picnic. He claimed Katie had a habit of writing down her thoughts in a journal and then burning the pages as a way to let go of things that were bothering her. He insisted that morning had been no different. They had a picnic, lit a small fire. She burned a few pages, and then he drove home. He said he didn't know what happened to Katie after that. Of course, detectives didn't buy Andrew's story, but the problem was they still didn't have any solid leads. The search teams had come up empty, and with no trace of Katie in the woods, investigators shifted their focus to her relationship with Andrew. According to Katie's family, she had met him 3 years earlier. He had 2 kids from a previous marriage, worked in construction, and at first he seemed like a reliable, stable guy. But it didn't take long for her loved ones to notice cracks in the relationship. Andrew had a habit of trying to control Katie, telling her how to act, how to talk, even how to think. He also constantly brought up her anxiety, using it as a way to dismiss anything she said or did that he didn't like. And over time, that pressure only made her anxiety worse. Eventually, Andrew offered to pay for her treatment, and Katie agreed. But as time went on, things just kept getting worse. The fights became more frequent, more intense. Eventually, the relationship fell apart. For Katie, breaking up felt like a weight off her shoulders, but for Andrew, it was something he just couldn't accept. Not long after they split, Katie discovered someone had slashed the tires on her car. She was certain it was Andrew, but she never reported it to the police. A few months before Katie went missing, she got a letter from the court saying she owed Andrew £4,000, the amount he'd spent on her treatment. Katie was already struggling to cover basic expenses for her and her kids. She had no idea how she'd come up with that kind of money. Over time, late fees piled on, and the debt grew to £6,000. The whole situation sent her anxiety through the roof. She was terrified she'd lose her home, the only stable place her kids had. But more than anything, she was afraid of Andrew. In one message to her mom, Katie said she was scared of him and genuinely believed he might hurt her. Still, just a month before she disappeared, Andrew reached out to her. He told her he regretted ever taking her to court. He promised to drop the case and even said he'd pay all the extra fees that had built up since the ruling. Andrew apologized for his anger, told her he wanted to change, and eventually Katie forgave him. Despite everything, they got back together. Still, detectives found something even more disturbing. Just one day after Andrew promised to fix everything with the court, he actually called the debt collectors and told them to go harder on Katie. He wanted them to push her even more. Investigators believe this was all part of his plan to increase the pressure on her, making her even more dependent on him. Katie, of course, had no idea this was happening because Andrew kept telling her he was working on canceling the whole thing. This gave detectives an even darker picture of the situation. All the evidence pointed to one conclusion: Andrew was a skilled manipulator and a compulsive liar who would do anything to get his way. Soon, detectives received further confirmation of this theory. People who knew him corroborated this, telling investigators that Andrew had a knack for getting inside people's heads and controlling them, something he had been doing for years, even with those closest to him. Despite all this, police still had no clue where Katie was. The search dragged on, day after day, without a trace. But then, finally, investigators caught a break. A local man came forward with a strange story. He said that the morning after Katie went missing, Andrew randomly showed up at his house. They were strangers, but Andrew approached him and asked a bizarre question. "Do you know when your bins were last emptied?" This immediately raised red flags. Officers rushed to the man's property and discovered that the trash bins hadn't been collected in several days. They started digging through the garbage, and inside one of the bags, they found something chilling: sandals stained with blood. A DNA test confirmed the blood was Katie's. At that point, detectives were certain of one thing: Katie was dead, and Andrew was officially charged with her murder. But a huge problem remained. They had no idea where her body was. Shortly after being formally charged, Andrew told detectives he wanted to talk. He changed his story yet again. This time, Andrew claimed he and Katie had gone to the woods that morning for a picnic. While sitting by a fire, Katie supposedly spotted a hatchet he'd used to chop wood and jokingly dared him to throw it at a soda can she was holding a few feet away. Andrew said he accepted the dare, but as he threw the hatchet, Katie suddenly leaned forward, and it struck her in the back of the head. Of course, detectives didn't believe a word of it, but this time, Andrew at least admitted the location of her body. He claimed that when Katie collapsed and died, he panicked. There was no cell service in that part of the forest, and he said he didn't have the strength to carry her back to the van. So, he decided to bury her there to prevent animals from getting to her body. He said he dug a shallow grave, placed Katie's body inside, and covered it with leaves and branches, marking the spot by tying a plastic bag to a stick, planning to return later. He also admitted to burning Katie's phone and some of her other belongings in his fireplace, then scooping up the charred remains and dumping them in a trash bin somewhere around town. After speaking with Andrew, police returned to his house, hoping to uncover new evidence. This time, forensic experts managed to find traces of Katie's blood inside his washing machine. Meanwhile, the search for Katie's body continued. Investigators focused on locating the stick with the plastic bag Andrew claimed he'd used to mark the burial site. But even with that clue, search teams couldn't find the exact spot. While the search was underway, detectives uncovered something else. After investigating Andrew's online activity, they found that he'd been communicating with numerous women on various dating sites, flirting with practically anyone who responded. He'd even been seeing at least one woman in person. According to their conversations, Andrew had told her he owned multiple properties across the country. They were even discussing moving to Scotland together and buying a house. But that wasn't the most significant discovery. As they continued examining his phone, investigators discovered something that changed everything. Based on Jeep's data, the day before Katie vanished, Andrew had stopped by his parents' house, then turned off his phone for about an hour and a half. During that time, his van was captured on several surveillance cameras heading toward the woods. After speaking to Andrew's parents, police learned that the morning before Katie went missing, he'd borrowed a shovel. That's when it clicked. Andrew had likely gone to the woods that day to dig her grave in advance. The next day, after killing Katie and using her phone to message her kids and family, Andrew also texted his other girlfriend using his own phone, telling her that something had come up with his kids and that he'd have to cancel their date. But there was more. In the Notes app on his phone, investigators found something even more disturbing: drafts of the exact same messages he'd sent to Katie's children and mother. Digital forensics showed that he'd been editing those drafts over several weeks, tweaking them repeatedly to match Katie's writing style so no one would suspect anything. Most tellingly, the word "while" was misspelled in the exact same way it appeared in the final messages. It's also important to note that the note had been created over a month before the murder, proving one thing beyond any doubt: Andrew didn't just snap. He'd been planning this for weeks, perhaps even longer, carefully laying the groundwork for something he knew he was going to do. When police confronted Andrew with the evidence that he'd been in the woods the day before the murder, he claimed he had only gone there to walk his dog, not to dig a grave. Soon after, search teams finally found the stick and the plastic bag Andrew had mentioned, but there was no grave anywhere nearby. They scoured the area inch by inch, but came up empty-handed. On April 29th, the detectives brought Andrew out to the woods and asked him to show them exactly where he had buried Katie. Once they arrived, Andrew pointed to a specific patch of ground. The ground looked completely undisturbed, flat, smooth, and totally natural. There were no signs of digging, no shifted soil, nothing out of place. It had been concealed so well that officers later admitted they would never have found it without Andrew's help. As soon as the forensic team began digging, they found Katie. But what they uncovered next was unexpected. Andrew had somehow managed to bury her beneath a web of tree roots growing deep underground. Later, a geology expert explained the complexity of the grave. According to him, it would have taken hours to dig something like that, meaning Andrew had clearly come back more than once. The expert also pointed out that Andrew had separated the soil by layers, then buried them back in the correct order, which explained why the grave looked so untouched. That level of planning was chilling. Katie's body was handed over to forensic examiners. Immediately, Andrew's story about the Coke can and the axe throw fell apart. Katie had died from blows to the head with a hatchet, not just one or two, but 12 times. By that point, there was no doubt in the detectives' minds. This wasn't an accident. This was cold, calculated, and premeditated murder. With all of that evidence, the prosecution began preparing for trial. The case against Andrew was overwhelming, more than enough to secure a conviction. But one thing remained unclear: the motive. Investigators believed Andrew was fueled by bitterness and resentment. Katie had broken up with him months earlier, and it seemed his ego couldn't handle the rejection. That bruised pride, they believed, turned into hatred and ultimately led him to kill her. The trial began in November 2022, and at first, Andrew pleaded not guilty. But just 3 days in, he suddenly changed course. Out of nowhere, he reversed his plea and admitted to the murder. Unfortunately for Katie's family, he didn't offer any new details. He simply accepted responsibility, but it was still enough. In the end, the court sentenced Andrew Burfield to life in prison with the possibility of parole after 32 years, calling him a deeply dangerous individual. The case was officially closed. Larissa Rodriguez grew up in a humble but close-knit family. Her parents were modest and reserved. They raised her with strong values of integrity, a strong work ethic, and family loyalty. From an early age, Larissa showed remarkable discipline. She trained in gymnastics, later graduated with a degree in sports science, and worked as a trainer and instructor at a fitness club. She led a healthy lifestyle, avoided harmful habits, meticulously cared for her well-being. She had only one serious relationship with Luis Antonio Garnica, who became her first partner and later her husband. To the family, he seemed quiet and polite. Larissa believed in the ideal of a strong family, and despite strains in their relationship, she remained committed to preserving the marriage. Luis came from a well-off background. His father had served as mayor of Pontal, and Luis himself was trained in medicine. But behind that veneer of success, he was self-centered and calculating. According to Larissa's relatives, at the beginning of their relationship, he had no steady income and depended on Larissa's mother, who sent him home, cooked meals over time. Despite having a diploma, his finances never improved, and he struggled to support two parallel lives, his official marriage and a secret relationship. His standing among Larissa's friends and family deteriorated. He grew increasingly withdrawn, distant, and indifferent. Even during Larissa's mother's final days, he visited only when forced. In the last months of the marriage, Luis was emotionally detached, cold, and often degraded his wife about her appearance, avoiding any real communication. Despite her efforts to reconcile, he continued to move further away, ignoring the obvious signs of their relationship's crisis. Elizabeth Arabaza, Luis's mother, played a pivotal role in this story. At 68, she appeared quiet and unassuming, but in reality, she was a manipulator with a troubling history. Her former husband and her daughter claimed she had a gambling problem and was deeply in debt. There were suspicions surrounding her involvement in the mysterious death of a relative connected through financial dealings. She often asked acquaintances for money and was suspected of selling others' jewelry. Her behavior within the Garnica family drew mixed opinions. With Larissa, she maintained the image of a caring mother-in-law, yet she regularly shared confidential information with her son and withheld crucial details from her daughter-in-law. Over time, it became clear she had played a decisive role in tearing the family apart and setting the stage for the tragic events that followed. These three figures, Larissa, Luis, and Elizabeth, became the central players in a chain of events whose outcomes were irreversible. In the spring of 2025, tensions between Larissa and Luis escalated dramatically. Their conflicts had become a regular occurrence, and any remaining trust was shattered. Luis's behavior grew increasingly distant. He often claimed to be working late or on call, but in reality, he was frequently meeting with another woman named Leticia. Larissa didn't know the woman's name at first, but she began to suspect he was seeing someone else, especially after noticing odd changes in his routine and his frequent irritation for no clear reason. Her suspicions were confirmed after she discreetly followed him one evening in mid-March. Larissa spotted Luis heading toward Letitia's house on a night he claimed to be working an overnight shift. Not long after that, she found personal items in his car, along with a medical-grade anesthetic, which clearly indicated a secretive relationship. She confided in Elizabeth, her mother-in-law, hoping for understanding. Instead, Elizabeth quickly told Luis about the confrontation and criticized Larissa for spying on him. Rather than receiving comfort, Larissa was told that being unfaithful is just something men do. Larissa didn't act on impulse. Despite her personal disappointment, she still tried to preserve her family. According to her father, she wanted to have a calm conversation with Luis and find a peaceful resolution. Over the next few days, she spoke privately with close friends about the possibility of divorce, but asked them not to get involved. Meanwhile, a friend offered her temporary use of an unoccupied apartment to help her take a step back and think things through. On March 15, 2025, Larissa tells Louise of her decision to end the marriage. She also confirmed her intentions to a trusted friend. Her goal was to reduce tension and prepare for a respectful separation. The following day, March 16th, Elisabetta Arrabata began researching highly toxic substances online. That same day, she offered Larissa homemade soup. Larissa, unaware of any danger, accepted the meal. Within hours, she began experiencing severe gastrointestinal symptoms, including cramps and nausea. Despite feeling unwell, Larissa assumed the discomfort was caused by stress or possibly spoiled food. On March 18th, Larissa once again opened up to a close friend, expressing how drained she felt physically and emotionally. She said her energy was slipping away and shared her concern that Louise continued to avoid any meaningful conversation. At the same time, Elisabetta, his mother, became unusually attentive, bringing food, initiating frequent visits, and insisting on helping Larissa, despite previously criticizing her for wanting to leave the marriage. By March 19th, Larissa confided in a relative about her worsening condition. She described sudden chills, weakness, abdominal pain, and an overwhelming sense of dread. She noted that she had never experienced anything like it before, and that the symptoms had persisted for several days. That message would become one of the last times she discussed her health. On March 20th, Larissa told her father she no longer saw a future in the marriage. Though she was still hoping to avoid a public fallout, she wanted the divorce to be amicable, if possible. That day, Elisabetta seemed calm but continued bringing over food. Larissa, although feeling unwell, didn't yet suspect a link between the meals and her condition. She assumed her health issues stemmed from emotional stress. Then came March 21st. Elisabetta arrived again with homemade soup. Larissa's condition took a drastic turn for the worse. By late that evening, she stopped responding to calls and messages. A few hours later, the devastating news came. She had passed away. On the morning of March 22nd, 2025, Louise reported that he had found his wife unconscious in their apartment. He claimed he'd just returned from a night shift, walked in, and found Larissa lying on the floor. According to his account, he immediately began CPR and called emergency services. However, discrepancies between his story and the actual evidence began to surface within hours of the investigation. One critical detail was a message Louise sent to Leticia. At 10:25 m.m., he texted Leticia to tell her that Larissa had passed away. Just 9 minutes later, at 10:34 m., paramedics arrived. Yet, when they entered, Louise was still performing resuscitation efforts, claiming Larissa was showing signs of life. The medical team quickly determined otherwise. She was already in a state of rigor mortis, making revival impossible. Emergency personnel documented that her body was cold, with no pulse or breathing, and her skin showed clear signs consistent with an extended time of death. When police arrived at the scene, one of the first things they noted was Louise's insistence on a rapid cremation. He didn't notify Larissa's family right away about her passing and took it upon himself to begin arranging the necessary paperwork for cremation. This immediately raised red flags for investigators, especially since Larissa's cultural background strictly followed burial traditions, with cremation never being considered. At the scene, officers noticed that the environment had been tampered with. Bed sheets had been stripped, rolled up. Towels with what appeared to be reddish stains were found nearby, and the laundry basket contained items possibly used for cleanup. The paramedic examining Larissa's body took note of undigested food in her stomach. This detail would later become a critical piece of evidence, prompting a full toxicology analysis. The initial assumption of a sudden cardiac event began to shift toward concerns about a possible poisoning. Louise's behavior on the day Larissa died seemed artificial, as if he were acting to make her death look like a sudden accident. The timeline, the messages he sent, and his behavior before and after emergency services arrived painted a picture that seemed increasingly rehearsed. At first glance, Louise seemed like a distraught husband caught in a crisis, but as investigators dug deeper, examining documents, message logs, and expert findings, the surface narrative started to unravel. Attention shifted from simply understanding what happened to examining who may have played a role in the moments immediately after Larissa's life ended. Following the official announcement of Larissa's death, Louise came under increasing scrutiny. Within just 24 hours of the incident, his actions raised serious concerns. The day after Larissa's passing, attempted financial transactions were discovered using her bank accounts. Louise used her debit card to purchase items at a pharmacy and attempted to withdraw cash from an ATM. Several of these transactions were flagged and declined due to suspicious activity. One attempt to access her savings account failed because of automatic security blocks. Later, bank officials confirmed that the attempted transactions originated from devices registered to Louise. At a local bank branch in Pontal, a teller reported an unusual request. Viviani, Louise's sister, attempted to obtain account information for Larissa. Despite having no legal authority to access those records, Larissa's account was registered in a different region, and Viviani's attempt to retrieve private financial data without a formal power of attorney was officially logged as an unauthorized access attempt. This incident immediately drew the attention of investigators. Meanwhile, Larissa's family, especially her brother and father, pushed for a thorough investigation into the circumstances surrounding her death. Troubled by rumors and inconsistencies, Larissa's brother sought legal counsel from attorney. Consultations with legal representatives began on March 24th, 2 days after her death. Despite online speculation suggesting Larissa may have taken her own life, her loved ones firmly rejected that possibility. According to those close to her, Larissa had no history of mental health struggles, maintained an active lifestyle, was in therapy, and had clear plans for her future, including filing for divorce. The attorney hired by Larissa's family demanded that no cremation take place until a full toxicological analysis was completed. This move proved critical to the case. The pathologist ordered a comprehensive examination, including toxicology screenings. While the initial exam did not pinpoint an immediate cause of death, the lab tests became central to developing the leading theory. At the same time, investigators focused on digital evidence. Combing through text messages, GPS data, and call logs, recovered chats between Louise, Viviani, and others provided deeper insight. One particularly telling exchange showed Viviani advising Louise to be cautious with their phones and not to confuse devices. In another message, she reminded him to mention a supposed history of heart conditions in Larissa's family when speaking to authorities. These texts were interpreted as an attempt to shape a false narrative and create a medically plausible explanation for what had occurred. While the investigation remained active, the family's lawyer successfully petitioned to freeze all of Larissa's financial accounts and restrict access to her assets. Authorities across relevant agencies were notified. These legal safeguards were essential in preventing further unauthorized actions by Louise and those allegedly working with him. At this point, investigators completely ruled out end her own life. Every move Louise and Viviani made following Larissa's passing appeared calculated, aimed at reducing exposure and covering their tracks. These patterns were sufficient to launch the formal phase of criminal proceedings. Roughly 1 month before Larissa passed away, another family member died under mysterious circumstances, Natalia, daughter of Elisabetti. At the time, the incident received no public attention. Natalia lived in Pontal with a long-term partner in a domestic relationship. Shortly before her death, she had a major falling out with her mother. Elisabetti strongly opposed Natalia's plans to start a family and become a parent. Their arguments centered around inheritance issues and shares in the family business. Following the disagreement, Natalia's partner left the house, leaving her alone with Elisabetti. something relatives later described as highly unusual. In the days that followed, Natalia complained of feeling increasingly unwell. However, Elisabetta never sought medical help or contacted emergency services. Instead, she reached out to Louise and Viviani, who were in another city at the time. The drive from Ribeirão Preto to Pontal takes approximately 40 minutes. During this time, Natalia remained without assistance. By the time Louise and Viviani arrived, Natalia's condition had deteriorated significantly. She was later taken to a hospital where she died. Eyewitnesses claimed that despite his medical training, Louise didn't advocate for emergency care and seemed more focused on when the death certificate would be issued. This detail was documented and became the subject of further investigation. Initially, Natalia's death was classified as natural, but as Larissa's case unfolded, new findings began to cast serious doubt on that conclusion. One red flag was the unexplained death of Natalia's dog. 2 weeks before the tragedy, relatives reported that the dog had no known health issues. Authorities approved the exhumation of the pet for toxicology testing based on the theory that poison might have been tested on the animal. Natalia's father, Antonio, revealed during questioning that Elisabetta was facing serious financial problems. He stated Elisabetta had debts exceeding 300,000 reais, some of which were linked to gambling. Natalia held a 16% share in the family business, which, because she had no dependent children, passed directly to her mother upon her death. Antonio also testified that not long before she passed, Natalia had mentioned receiving threats from her mother regarding her personal life. Elisabetta's alleged efforts to secure full control over those assets led to major tensions with her ex-husband. Further disturbing details emerged about Elisabetta's past. Years earlier, a friend recalled a strange episode. After having tea with Elisabetta, she experienced sharp abdominal pain, followed by unconsciousness. Emergency care saved her, and doctors later suspected a toxic substance had been involved. However, that case was never formally investigated. As Larissa's story gained public attention, more people connected to the Garnica family began stepping forward, sharing concerns about Elisabetta's behavior. After reviewing the series of suspicious patterns, investigators reached a preliminary conclusion. Natalia may have been the first confirmed victim, and her dog potentially part of a test run for what followed. The combination of poisoning, delayed medical response, concealed symptoms, and a motive rooted in inheritance formed a disturbing picture. From this point forward, the case took on a much broader scope. A deeper analysis of these incidents revealed a consistent pattern in Elisabetta's financial behavior. She repeatedly sought new sources of income, pressured those close to her, and manipulated legal access to property and assets. After Natalia and Larissa passed, these tactics intensified in the context of mounting debts and financial instability. Her motives became a central focus of the investigation. Amid the dual investigations into the deaths of Larissa and Natalia, law enforcement began uncovering information that hinted at additional potentially criminal episodes linked to Elisabetta Arabati. The case involved a woman who had been friendly with Elisabetta. Years after an odd incident, she finally spoke out. Following a tea visit at Elisabetta's home, she suddenly felt dizzy, nauseous, and disoriented. Elisabetta offered her a headache remedy, a blue capsule. She took the pill, but was later hospitalized that night with suspected poisoning. Doctors documented toxic exposure to an unknown substance, but the woman never filed a report at the time. She later admitted she was afraid of becoming entangled in legal battles. Eventually, she reached out to Larissa's family attorney after media reports surfaced about possible poisonings. Yet another concerning event came to light. Elisabetta had attempted to obtain power of attorney from a woman expecting to receive court-ordered compensation. The woman, alarmed by Elisabetta's persistence, later told investigators she feared she might have been a future target. Her statement was formally included in the case files. According to law enforcement, a clear pattern was beginning to emerge in Elisabetta's actions. She would first establish close relationships with financially stable women, earn their trust, and shortly afterward, they would suffer sudden and unexplained health issues. Given these accounts, investigators began pursuing a new theory. They might be dealing with a series of connected incidents rather than isolated ones. Law enforcement officials issued a public appeal, urging anyone who had experienced suspicious behavior from Elisabetta Arrabazza to contact authorities. Once the toxicology reports came in, the investigation entered a decisive phase. Forensic specialists confirmed the presence of a compound derived from chumbinho, a banned toxic substance in Larissa's system. This finding was pivotal. Until then, Louise and Elisabetta had claimed that Larissa passed away from natural causes, but the chemical evidence completely debunked their story. Another critical piece of the puzzle came from surveillance footage at the residential complex. Security cameras showed that, on the morning of March 22nd, Louise arrived at the apartment later than he had claimed, and Viviani arrived shortly before emergency services were called. These details directly contradicted their official statements. Taken together, the presence of a toxic compound, suspicious online searches, misleading explanations, tampered evidence, and timeline inconsistencies formed a clear chain of evidence. Investigators concluded that Larissa's death was not a random event, but a carefully coordinated act carried out by multiple individuals. The evidence didn't just suggest wrongdoing, it presented a legally viable case of premeditated criminal activity. By mid-April 2025, the investigation reached the stage of formal charges. Based on forensic data, digital correspondence, and verified discrepancies in witness accounts, police filed charges against three primary individuals: Elisabetta Arrabazza, Luis Garnica, and his sister, Viviani Garnica. The main charge involved the intentional death of Larissa Rodriguez through poisoning. Investigators determined that Elisabetta had prepared Larissa's meals in the final days of her life, actively researched toxic substances, created a plan to conceal the act, and coordinated the actions of her family members. Luis was charged as an accomplice. He was aware of his mother's intentions, failed to intervene, concealed signs of poisoning, and helped destroy evidence afterward. He was also the one who pushed for rapid cremation, a move that could have eliminated the chance of detecting any toxic substances. Viviani was also named as an accomplice. Her role included coordination with her brother, erasing digital traces, attempting to access the victim's bank accounts, and helping conceal key details surrounding the incident. Recovered messages from her phone confirmed that she knew about Larissa's death in advance and was involved in planning how to speak with law enforcement and medical professionals. Simultaneously, a separate investigation was launched into the circumstances surrounding Natalia's passing. Another contributing factor was the earlier death of Natalia's dog, which had also raised alarms. While formal charges in Natalia's case had not yet been filed, the evidence was placed in a separate investigative file. The charges against all three individuals were formally submitted to the district attorney's office. Each was summoned for questioning. Following the interrogation, both Elisabetta and Louise were taken into custody. Viviani was placed under travel restrictions, required to remain within the region, and ordered to surrender her passport. Meanwhile, the court approved a request to seize Garnica family assets and freeze all accounts tied to the suspects. The case sparked significant public interest. Journalists, advocacy groups, and legal experts began a national conversation about the shortcomings in addressing domestic aggression, legal loopholes in women's protection, and missed warning signs. Many pointed out that the tragedy might have been avoided had social services intervened earlier. At this point, the charges have been formally established, and the investigation has completed the collection of core evidence. Next, the trial will proceed, with the expectation of revealing the whole truth to the public.